So, where were you? Were you alive when John F. Kennedy was assassinated November 22nd, 1963? 61 years ago today. Most people weren't, but some people were. And I got to admit something that I'm not proud of, but I actually believed the Warren Commission for a long time. Lee Harvey Oswald shot him, and he shot him by himself. Yes, why would the government ever lie to us? Oh boy, talk about naive. The government, I believe, killed John F. Kennedy. And so do very key members of John F. Kennedy's family. More on that in a second. But with President Trump coming back, maybe, finally, soon, we'll all be able to get to the bottom of what really happened.
JFK in particular. So they called me, a lot of good people called me, people that that you would find reasonable people. And they asked me not to do it. So I said, well, we'll close it for another time. But if I win, I'm going to open them up. I'm just going to open enough time.
Why didn't you open it up the first time?
Because a lot of times,
what was the hesitation?
Addresses, people that are still living. There are people that are affected.
Open up the files on JFK. They talked him out of it the first time. They won't talk him out of it again. And I think that's fabulous. I hear one of the reasons why, because, well, associates of Lee Harvey Oswald are still alive. Yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald married that Russian girl, right? You may not know this part of the story. Came back to Dallas, Texas, and actually moved into a house in Dallas. This house, which was owned by Ruth Paine, a somewhat mysterious figure in all of this. There's Ruth in the corner with Lee Harvey Oswald's mother and Marina Oswald. She is still alive today. Yeah, she got very close to the Oswalds, and she's out there somewhere, and people have questions about her and what she knew and all that stuff. And these are reasonable questions. I'm sure she has reasonable answers. But, you know, I've become acquainted with R.F. Kennedy Jr. So has everybody. Here's RFK as a little kid with his uncle. Now, who the hell am I, or is anybody, to tell this guy what really happened to his uncle? I think we have to listen to him. And it's amazing that RFK Jr. has now teamed up with President Trump. I know RFK is going to Health and Human Services. I wish maybe a little bit later in the administration he goes to the, I don't know, Directorate of National Intelligence or the CIA or something, because this guy seems to know where all the bodies just might be buried. During the campaign, he went on a podcast and spoke very, very frankly and with a common sense. It all makes sense when you hear RFK talk about what probably happened to his uncle and why.
My uncle takes office 3 days later, and then his 1,000 days in office are just a constant fistfight with the military-industrial complex to keep the country out of war. They kept trying to trick him into war. They did it at the Bay of Pigs 3 months in. They tell him, you got to send these guys over. And he said, I'm not using the military to invade a country. And, you know, I don't like communism. I don't like Castro. But the Cubans have to make their own determination about what kind of government they're going to have. The U.S. can't go into all these other countries and change governments around. And he said, I don't want the U.S. military involved, and I don't think we should be involved in any part of it.
This I've heard before, but to hear it from him and the way he says it and his authority, he's not just some guy on the History Channel. He's lived this stuff. And JFK, yeah, he was about communist containment, but he didn't want to go overboard. It was really up to the people of those countries to deal with it, not America. RFK goes on.
Why do you think 2,000 men are going to be able to, win this battle? And they said, because we have the whole thing wired and rigged, and there's going to be a big uprising in Cuba, and it's all done. This is what Alan Dulles told him. Richard Bissell, Charles Cabela was the military general of the CIA. He suspected that, but he couldn't believe they just lying to him. And, when those men were dying on the beach, and they were telling, now you got to send in air cover, you got to send in the Essex, the aircraft carrier. He said, I'm not. And he realized he'd been tricked, and they thought a young president would, cave in to avoid humiliation. It was the lowest point of my uncle's presidency that those men were dying because of his bad decision.
Talking about the Bay of Pigs, about that invasion, and it was It was kind of haphazard and amateurish, and they put him in a corner. But JFK didn't want to start World War III. You know, he said it was rigged. The generals, the CIA, they told him it was rigged. You know, once this happens, it's all going to fall down. I've heard this before, like the Cheneys, like Wolfowitz, like Bush. As soon as we go into Iraq, it's all going to just fall into place, right? We're going to be greeted as liberators. It's the same institutions, the same style of lies. Keep going.
He took the blame publicly, but privately he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And then over the next couple months, he fired Dulles, he fired Cabell, he fired Bisol, and he tried to clean up the agency. And then, you know, they tried to get him to go into Laos. He refused. They called him a traitor for that. They tried to get him to go into Cuba in '61 and again in '62 during the missile crisis, and he wouldn't send it. He wouldn't, you know, go invade. They tried to get him to go in Berlin in '62, and he wouldn't. They tried to get him to go in Vietnam. They said, you need 250,000 troops. His closest advisors, people he trusted, like Max Taylor, Averell Harriman, Dean Acheson, they said, if you don't send in 250,000 troops, the Vietnamese government's going to collapse. And he said, it's their government. It can't be our fight. You know, we can help them the way the French helped us during the revolution, but we cannot fight. This cannot be the American war.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does. It's fascinating that Kennedy wanted to blow up the CIA. You know, Richard Nixon wanted to blow up the CIA as well. Richard Nixon believes that, well, that's why they got him on Watergate, that the CIA had a role in that. The Joint Chiefs, hawkish then, hawkish now. And then, let's see here, you're going to hear something about National Security Memo 263. I got it right here. RFK tells us what it is, but I got it right here. This is dynamite.
He signed National Security Order 263, ordering all military personnel out of Vietnam, with the first 1,000 coming home in November and the last one coming home the following December. And 30 days to the day after he signed that order, he was murdered. And a week after that, President Johnson remanded the order and then sent 250,000 troops in.
Yeah, it all checks out. National Security Memo 263, withdraw 1,000 U.S. military personnel by the end of 1963. How about that? But he shot and killed, and a week later, LBJ, who, let's face it, LBJ, I mean, man, did anybody benefit on November 22nd, 1963, like LBJ and those who wanted war in Iraq, in Vietnam, excuse me? How about this stuff? And he ordered thousands, tens upon thousands, 250,000 troops when Kennedy wanted the opposite. All right, one more from RFK Jr.
My father ran against the war in '68. He wins the California primary, meaning he's on his way to the White House, and he shot that night. Martin Luther King had become a peace activist 2 months before he was shot. These traumas, my uncle's death, my father, King's death, the Vietnam War itself, 9/11, and COVID, each one of these traumas pushed us a little farther down that road that Eisenhower warned us against, where today, you know, we are the military-industrial complex, our democracy. Nobody in this country believes that their voices are audible in Washington. You know, everything is rigged, and everybody knows it. It's like the kabuki theater of a democracy. It's not real. It's a Hollywood stage set with, you know, people pretending to have elections that are already chosen in advance and everything else. And I'm not being paranoid. Just look what's happening right now.
Look what's happening. He was talking about this during the campaign. Kamala Harris, the nominee, 0 votes, right? 0 votes, and Kamala Harris. And the whole thing looks so spooky and weird, didn't it? After listening to RFK, you have like a better sense of how the world really works. A couple of more things on the assassination of Kennedy on this, the 61st anniversary. The Warren Commission convenes, and it looks like they get exactly the answer they want, that Oswald did it, and Oswald did it by himself. But how did they get that answer? How did they ensure they got the answer they wanted? Well, one thing they had to do was kill all the stuff that an FBI agent had, an FBI agent by the name of Hosty, H-O-S-T-Y. He was in contact with Oswald before the assassination. He was this close to having his appointment with Lee Harvey Oswald, but never quite made it to the appointment. He spoke out about this later. This is Hosty, ex-FBI agent. His assignment was Lee Harvey Oswald, but he botched it. And he said probably something that the FBI didn't want him to say. A couple of things, actually, but now it really, really rings true. This is the FBI that I know, and I think you know, too.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned in the book on page 96, I believe it is, that you felt frustrated in the early stages of the investigation.
Yes.
Because you felt as if everything you were doing was being scrutinized and nitpicked.
Right.
Even though you had been acting by the book, I believe is how
Yes,
you put
right.
it. Maybe I'm missing something, but it doesn't seem quite by the book to tear up a note from the assassin and flush it down the toilet.
That's true. However, I was told to do that. I was following orders. That's true. But the people who were nitpicking me were the ones that ordered me to do it. So I don't feel that that they should have been second-guessing me on that point.
They ordered him to destroy documents. They ordered him to destroy evidence. Some things never seem to change with this FBI, huh? Next, please, Agent Hosty.
The word was out there was going to be a cover-up. So I guess the FBI officials and the CIA and everybody else figured, well, we'll have our little secondary cover-ups. The primary cover-up was what happened in Mexico City, and then the CIA covered up the fact that they were dealing with one of Castro's cabinet officers to try to assassinate him. They covered that up, and I guess then the FBI covered up. I don't know what all the Secret Service and the State Department covered up, but yeah, that's true. I shouldn't have done it. I admit it.
He admits it just before he dies. He admits it. All those cover-ups. How do they keep these cover-ups straight, huh? Puts the January 6th situation into a little bit of, I don't know, just cover-up. Who is that little cop who encouraged everybody to come on to Capitol Hill? Step right up, this way to the chaos, this way, get in there. Let's see, why do the cops just stand there on either side? Most Americans have never seen this footage, you know. Most Americans have never seen what you're seeing right here. What about this? These guys who decide to take a coffee break just in time for Ashley Babbitt to be shot. What about that? Now, here's something that I only saw very recently. So you had a lot of folks outside the Capitol, and actually things were peaceful. Things were okay. It was crowded, but it was under control. And then the cops started firing flash grenades and tear gas into the crowd.
Stingbo deployed! Stingbo deployed! Stingbo deployed!
What's your ETA for I-3?
Hey, no one, what's that? Stingbo, over here!
Now, why the hell would you do that? You're making the situation worse. Do you want to make it worse? We'll be right back with more.